Now, this 400-year saga is often framed as a historical bedtime story, a sprawling, calming epic to help you fall asleep to the entire story of the Medici family. But I promise you, while the history is sweeping, it is frankly way too thrilling to sleep through. What we are looking at here is the mesmerizing tale of a dynasty that over centuries essentially pulled Western civilization right out of the Middle Ages. So how on earth did one quiet family of bankers create the Renaissance? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the sheer scope of this massive 400-year history. This explainer is a sweeping narrative of a family rising from the absolute shadows of merchant banking straight to the ultimate pinnacles of European power, and then, eventually, to a melancholic but glorious extinction. It's an incredible story of art, assassinations, and just unparalleled influence. Okay, let's dive into this and break this massive history down into 5 distinct eras. First, the bankers of Florence. Second, Lorenzo's golden age. Third, exile, popes, and chaos. Fourth, the Grand Dukes. And finally, the final gift. Before we jump right into the first era, let's just quickly ground ourselves in the incredible biological and political lifespan of this family. They start out as subtle bankers in the 1400s. By the 1500s, they are sitting on the papal throne and wearing the crowns of France. Moving into the 1600s, they are absolute dukes, protecting scientists like Galileo, right before facing extinction in the 1700s. It's just a breathtaking arc. All right, Era 1, the bankers of Florence. This foundational chapter is really defined by Patriarch Giovanni de Medici and his brilliant son, Cosimo the Elder. You can think of the early Medici almost like mist, totally invisible but incredibly persistent. While rival families like the Albizzi were out there throwing lavish feasts and brandishing swords, Giovanni was working quietly in the shadows. He knew a crucial secret. Florence ran on credit. If you control the flow of money, you control the very bones of the city. The Medici utilized innovations like double-entry bookkeeping, and honestly, back then, that was a revolutionary weapon. It let them track enormous volumes of financial data, and they eventually secured control of the papal treasury. So every act of charity, every forgiven debt, it was a carefully calculated brick in a massive structure of soft power. Cosimo the Elder took this banking foundation and just turned it into absolute political mastery. The rival families grew terrified of this quiet power, right? So they orchestrated Cosimo's arrest and exile for alleged tyranny. But Cosimo was smart. He knew Florence needed the Medici way more than the Medici needed Florence. And sure enough, within a year, the city's economy tightened up, resentment grew, and the public literally demanded his return. He came back not by force, but by invitation. He then cemented his power through art, funding Brunelleschi's iconic dome and Donatello's sculptures, wrapping his immense influence in this cloak of modesty. By the time he died, this man who actively avoided crowns was hailed as the father of the fatherland. That foundational brilliance perfectly sets the stage for our second era, Lorenzo's golden age. Under Cosimo's charismatic grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, the Renaissance truly catches fire. If Cosimo ruled from the shadows, Lorenzo stepped directly into the sunlight. He had this effortless authority and a magnetism that drew literally the greatest minds of Europe straight to his door. His palace became an actual incubator for geniuses. I mean, he invited a young Michelangelo to come live in the Medici Palace, and he supported Sandro Botticelli as he painted these incredible mythological masterpieces. Florence transformed into a living dream. It was a staggering cultural explosion where art, knowledge, and commerce all blended into this single, expanding force. But, as we know, a golden age can turn to blood in an absolute instant. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the sheer audacity of it. Resentment from the rival Pazzi family, who were secretly backed by the Pope, culminated in a shocking attack on a Sunday morning in 1478 right inside the Duomo. Lorenzo's brother Giuliano was brutally murdered, and Lorenzo himself barely survived. Facing an ensuing war with Naples and the papacy, Lorenzo did the unthinkable. He traveled to Naples completely alone and unarmed, walking directly into the court of a ruthless king. His sheer intellect and charm secured peace, saving Florence and instantly elevating him from a mere leader to a legendary protector. But, of course, golden ages don't last forever. Following Lorenzo's death in 1492, we enter the third era: exile, popes, and chaos. The light of the Renaissance really begins to flicker violently here. Without Lorenzo's steady hand guiding things, a rapid domino effect just consumed the city. His son, Piero, panicked and surrendered to the invading French army. The furious citizens of Florence then exiled the Medici. Into this massive power vacuum stepped the radical friar Savonarola, who ordered the infamous bonfire of the vanities, literally burning paintings and books in the street. But hey, the Medici wouldn't stay gone for long. Years later, they forced their way back into Florence, but this time, not with quiet diplomacy. No, they came backed by the terrifying might of papal and Spanish armies. The reason they had that papal backing in the first place is that they had literally captured the church. Lorenzo's son Giovanni had spent his exile rising through the church ranks and was actually elected Pope Leo X. As Pope Leo famously declared, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." Think about the supreme irony there. The family that built its entire power base by strictly avoiding titles and crowns now sat on the throne of St. Peter, fully embracing this decadent royal extravagance. And to put that into perspective, the geopolitical consequences of the Medici popes were just massive. Leo X funded incredible art by Raphael, but his lavish spending required the aggressive sale of indulgences, and that directly sparked Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. Later on, the second Medici Pope, Clement VII, struggled to balance the shifting powers of Europe and ended up facing an absolute catastrophe, the horrifying 1527 sack of Rome by Emperor Charles V's mercenaries. It was really the symbolic end of the High Renaissance. From the ashes of all that chaos, the family evolved once again. Welcome to the Fourth Era, the Grand Dukes. By 1530, the Florentine Republic fully surrendered, and the Medici returned as absolute hereditary rulers. And this brilliantly illustrates just how total the transformation of the dynasty was. While the original Cosimo the Elder used shadows, republican influence, and banking, the new 17-year-old Duke, Cosimo I, went in a totally different direction. He centralized power ruthlessly. He built fortresses, conquered the neighboring city of Siena, and upgraded Florence into a full-blown Grand Duchy. The quiet mist of the early days had officially turned to cold, hard iron. You see, the true genius of the Medici was their constant adaptation. It's almost like a giant puzzle they were always solving. Their tools of soft power continually shifted to survive the rapidly changing European landscape. They started with banking, moved into papal influence, and now they transitioned into high-level statecraft and the patronage of science. Their influence expanded way beyond Italy. Through incredibly strategic marital diplomacy, they wove their bloodline into the thrones of Europe, eventually producing two powerful queens of France, Catherine and Marie de Medici. Meanwhile, back home at Florence, they were protecting groundbreaking scientific inquiry. Grand Duke Cosimo II famously patronized Galileo Galilei. In fact, Galileo even named the newly discovered moons of Jupiter the Medicean stars, right in their honor. But dynasties, like all things, eventually run out of time. And this brings us to the twilight of the family in the 1700s. Era 5, the final gift. The late 1600s and early 1700s saw the bloodline slowly, tragically begin to fade. Their rulers grew increasingly isolated and severe. By the time of the melancholic final Grand Duke, Gian Gastone, the family was entirely out of heirs. The treasury was dwindling, and the great foreign powers of Europe were eagerly waiting in the wings like vultures, ready to carve up Tuscany and loot centuries of irreplaceable treasures the Medici had collected. But wait, the story doesn't end with a total collapse. So the crucial point here is what the very last Medici did. Her name was Anna Maria Luisa. Knowing her family's political reign was over and that foreign rulers were stepping in to take over Tuscany, she executed a frankly genius legal maneuver called the Family Pact of 1737. She bequeathed the entirety of the Medici art, archives, and collections to the new ruling state on one absolute, unbreakable condition: nothing could ever leave Florence. Because of that single document, centuries of culture were saved from being scattered across foreign vaults. Botticelli's Venus, Michelangelo's sculptures, Gallo's instruments, they all stayed right where they belonged. That dangerous, divided medieval city of stone that the early Medici had entered 300 years prior had been totally transformed into an eternal, preserved masterpiece. And it was all thanks to the vision of one family. The Medici dynasty died out for sure, but their renaissance, it never ended. They achieved something so few rulers ever managed to do: true immortality through ideas and beauty. And that leaves us with a really powerful thought to end this explainer on today. True power isn't really about what you rule in the moment. It's